Hello and welcome to an easy watercolor tutorial. My name is Lacey Walker. I'm the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and I love teaching people how to paint watercolor. And today we're going to be doing a watercolor that's inspired by a drive that I took through Spain. I highly encourage you to give this a try. I think it's a lot of fun to do, and I think you're going to have a ton of fun doing it. Let me know in the comments how you do when you do paint this, because it's just kind of a peaceful painting. I want to go to there. All right, let's get to painting, and I'm going to tell you about my setup and the supplies I'm using. So here are all the supplies and the setup that I'm going to be using today. I do want you to keep in mind that when I make these tutorials, my ideal goal is that anybody can follow these with some differing supplies, as long as you have the basics, aka a paintbrush, paper, and some sort of watercolors. So when I do talk about what I am using here, I'm letting you know just in case you're curious, but you can do this with other things. I'm going to be painting specifically in my Big Idea sketchbook. This is a watercolor specific sketchbook that I have manufactured and I sell on my website. As you can see, it's filled with a whole bunch of my watercolor in it, and I love this paper. I think it's great. And it has 140-pound cold pressed cotton paper in it, so it's delightful to paint in. But you could do this tutorial with any sort of paper. I've done it on Canson when I was doing some practicing and stuff, so whatever paper you have is going to be fine. Same thing is going to go for the colors that I'm using over here. I don't often in my tutorials actually talk about what specific color I'm using here. I will sometimes kind of give you like a vague idea, or sometimes I'll reference a color that's similar, that's a more widely known color, just so that you have some idea, because again, the idea is not to use the exact same colors, exact same brands necessarily as I am. The idea is to kind of match the colors in general that I'm using. So we've got our paper, we've got our watercolors. I also have some containers of water here. I'm going to be using a size 3 quill brush here. Again, this is another one of my supplies that I have manufactured, but if you have another quill brush or something like a size 12 or size 10 round brush, or even a little bit bigger, depending on the size that you're going to be working. And the way I like to set up my supplies is I put all the wet stuff over where my dominant hand is, and I even specifically put down a towel first, and then I layer on a couple layers of paper towel, because I find the paper towel to be easier to actually get better control of how much water is in my brush. However, by putting it on top of the towel, it seems to make the paper towel last longer, and it also keeps my workstation just a little bit less wet. In addition to that, I'm going to use a spray bottle just to spray my colors, make sure that they're all nice and activated. I've got a couple clips that I usually use while I am just trying to keep my piece open and clipped down. I'm going to be using some masking tape. This is just some basic masking tape. I honestly do not know at this point when or what brand this is. I bought this probably 2 years ago in a huge pack of like 20. It was just the cheapest masking tape I could possibly find. And then the last little thing you might want is some sort of extra book or box or whatever. It doesn't really matter what the object is, but I do often like to kind of put something else underneath this to help me prop this up so it's at a bit of an angle so the water will flow down. I just find it a little more predictable if there's a bit of an angle so that the water flows in a more predictable way. I'm going to clip the top part together, and then I'm going to tape this off, and then I will clip my bottom part here too. I do have 2 more supplies I'm using. I just have an extra piece of paper towel because there's a couple things I want to lift, and I find a paper towel easiest. And I'm also going to be using a heat gun. Oh, before I actually get this propped up, I just want to share with you the actual inspiration for this one. And it was this painting I did. I actually did a short form video a couple days ago where we painted this in under 10 minutes, and it's just a cute little painting. And what I want to do today is I want to take this and I want to take away the time limit, but I do want to make it a little more in depth and a little bigger, and I also want to make sure I add in things like a sky and take some time to do the rose in watercolor versus just using a pen to quickly do this. I still think this one's really cute, but I just want to show you how you can take kind of a simple idea and maybe kind of extrapolate on it, and if you felt like you had a little more time after you actually got going on something smaller like this, you could take it into a bigger format or a more complex format if you've got the time. And honestly, if you're painting in a sketchbook, this part of the process is totally optional. I just really like when I take it off at the very end and there's those nice crisp lines. There's just something very satisfying to me about that. I've also seen some people who paint without using tape and they have messy kind of borders, and that can look really cute too. It just depends on your personal style. There's something just very satisfying to me about this. I like to think about it like it's like extra credit when you take your tape off. It takes the painting from being like, oh, I like that, to like, oh, it's really cute. Now we're actually going to be starting the painting. So what I want to do is we're going to be starting with our sky. That's going to be a layer behind. So I'm going to put probably 3 or 4 sprays of water in here. I want there to be a lot of this color. I did forget one supply you're going to probably want, and that are tester strips. I get asked quite a bit where I get my tester strips, and I don't really get them. When I am experimenting with different things, if there's extra paper, I cut off along the edges, or sometimes I will cut off if the backside is not doing what I want it to do. I'll just use one side of it here. So I just use whatever scraps I have and kind of harvest them. We're going to be starting with a nice blue sky here. And I want this to be a nice deep blue color. So I'm starting with a blue that is... This is probably most similar to something like an ultramarine or what I would call like a medium type blue. My typical favorite blue that I like to use is a phthalo blue, but that one has more cool undertones, and I want something that's a little more neutral and in some ways kind of a deeper color. Not that we necessarily need this to be super duper saturated, but it's kind of this deeper blue color. And honestly, as I'm mixing these colors up, I want you to keep in mind that you could even use a totally different color scheme than me. What you're going to want to focus on if you are doing that is how saturated your colors are and kind of the values that you're achieving, less than the actual colors you're achieving. So you could do a completely different color, but as long as it's a similar saturation or value level to what I'm doing, that's going to be just fine. So I've only been taking one single color, kind of an ultramarine-esque color, and mixing it in until I get to about this saturation. We want this to be dark-ish. I want it to be kind of a lighter color when it dries, which it will be, but I want there to be enough contrast because I want to actually lift out some clouds as I'm doing this, and in order to do that and be able to actually see it, you need a dark enough color to where that'll happen. Then I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm just going to go ahead and rip a couple different pieces so that I have some of this natural edge, because I'm going to kind of scrunch and we're going to be swiping. I want some of these like high wind type clouds. So that's what we're going to do. And I have mine resting a little bit up at an angle, and we want to make sure we have plenty of this mixed up because you want to be able to basically fully submerge your brush into here. So you're going to load your brush up. And then you're going to make a stripe across. We do not want to run out of color, so if you need to, you can reload your brush to kind of get that first line going. We're going to pull it down, add more, pull it down. We're trying to use a light touch, and we're trying to just fill this upper about 4th area, and then we're going to start dipping into some fresh, clean water, pulling that down. And once I get down to about this 3rd or halfway, I'm going to get more aggressive with kind of washing a little bit of that out of my brush and pulling it down. And you're going to notice that this isn't super smooth, and that's actually going to be totally fine. Washing my brush, putting more water in it, pulling it down. Because since we're lifting this out, we don't have to be super duper careful. We just have to work quickly, because we can disguise areas like this by just taking the edge of that paper towel and whoop, look at that, we've got a high wind cloud. Let's just swipe across. Sometimes you're going to need to take a little bit of that paper towel off. Let's do a little swoop. Woo! We're just making those high wind type clouds here. And you can bring this down. I've got a bit of an area that's kind of buckled here. Let's grab some of that water just at the bottom. And let's incorporate this too. I'm gonna kind of tap in a couple areas. Tap and swoop. Just kind of mess with it until you get some sort of an interesting pattern. I feel like you can feel how there's movement in that sky now. I'm going to just tap some of that extra up too while I'm at it. And then we're going to be moving on to another stage, but we need this to be completely dry. So you probably know what time it is. It's time to let it dry or make it dry. And now that that layer is dry, we're going to be adding different layers of hills that move towards us. And we're going to be doing this by adding different layers of saturation. So we're going to start by putting a little water in one of these wells because we do want to make sure we have quite a bit of this. I'm going to make sure my brush is actually washed. And then I want to mix up kind of a golden, orangey, yellow color, but I want it to have a lot of water in it. So it's going to be very unsaturated. We're using a common trick in painting called atmospheric perspective, where the things that are further away are going to be lighter in color because they're a little more out of focus. So I'm just going to start with some yellow. Any sort of a yellow would be fine. This is kind of like a yellow ochre type color. And I've got my tester strip. Ooh, and I also have some of that green seeping in from the edge of my corner. Some of my blue got down there. So I'm just going to grab that real quick just to stop that from totally contaminating my color. Let's put a little more water in there. And a little more yellow. Okay, so here's where we are initially. It's pretty light. We do want this color to be light, but I don't want it to be quite that light. So I'm going to put a little more yellow, and then let's put a little orange in there. Maybe one of each. And I don't tend to wash my brush very often when I'm doing an actual painting. I tend to actually wash the pans when I'm done with the painting. And by wash, I just wash my brush and then just kind of wipe any of those colors that got in there out. Okay, I think this is going to be a nice color for our first layer. It's going to dry a lot lighter than that. And you know what? I'm going to put one brush full of water. I want it to be a little bit lighter. I went a little bit darker than what I wanted. Because we're going to be layering this over some of that blue, that kind of gradient that came down, we're going to get some interesting colors. It's going to kind of make it a little bit green, actually. Okay, so we're going to fill our brush completely with this, and we're going to make a swoop across the page, fill it in a little bit, and then we're going to refill our brush with water, and then we're going to bring it all the way down to the bottom. Similar to how we did the sky, almost. So fill it. Okay, here's my first hill. Let's bring this over, trying not to run out of color. Let's refill that a little bit here. And then let's wash our brush completely and let's just grab some water and pull it down. Now the reason why we're doing this and we're painting the entire page, even though we're only really painting little bits at a time, is because anytime you stop an area, you're going to get a bit of a line at the bottom of it, and that's going to mean that we don't have to actually encounter or pre-plan where every single line of this is going to go. We can kind of paint as we go, and each one at the bottom will kind of all just resolve itself. I am going to pick up a little bit because I know that I want to have this overlap over here, and if I can lighten this a little bit, it'll make my job easier when I do go to do that. You could also, at this point, if you wanted to add a little texture, we could drop a little water in here. We're making fields, like farming type fields, so they have texture in them. So you could drop in some water to create blooms. You could even take some of this blue and let's say, oh, there's, you know, an indentation here or something. You don't have to do this part of it. You can keep it nice and smooth. But if you were feeling fancy, you can kind of make this kind of a mottled color just to give it a little bit of texture. And then before I do anything else, you've probably guessed it, but we need to let it dry or make it dry. Okay, now that this is dry, I want you to notice a couple things. One, because we did layer this over that blue and then we did drop a little bit of that blue in, this is the color we were using on our tester strip, and now it looks like this. So it's kind of an interesting little trick when we do bring the sky down to actually kind of color grade all the mountains or the hills that you're painting into actually being part of this landscape that has this color sky. Now, part of the charm of these hills are going to be actually creating the rows like they're some sort of a farming type field. So what I want us to do is two things. One, I want to put in some of these little trees that really remind me of the European countryside. They actually look kind of conical and or like really elongated tear shapes. So I'm going to wash my brush, and then let's just grab, I want enough to where I can refill my brush a couple times, so I'm just going to put some water and start grabbing a green. Any sort of a green is totally fine. I'm personally grabbing something that kind of looks like an olive green, swirling around a couple times, re-adding it in. And then I'm going to grab some blue. I can grab a little bit of each of these because I want it to be a little bit darker. And we can modify our green to be how we want it to be. Okay, we want to take advantage of the shape of our brush because these are the shapes of our trees, so play around with the angle that you hold your brush at and how much pressure you actually need to use. I'm going to fill my brush here, and then I'm just going to tap along this here. I'm going to kind of change the height. Oh, let's get a big one there. These don't need to be absolutely perfect. Just adding in a couple. Like a little grove. There's somebody's houses up here, is what we're kind of hinting to. And then we're going to wash our brush, tap it off, and then we're going to just kind of drag that along just to kind of soften that down so it's a little bit more. If you have any that didn't connect, you can go in and connect them if you want. It probably doesn't really matter. Okay, now while that soaks in a little bit, what we want to do is prepare our color to be the rows that we're going to be putting onto this. And you could change your rows if you wanted them to be more green. You could even, as a matter of fact, let's make our back ones, the rows are going to be kind of a green color. Maybe it's an orchard back there, and then maybe we can do more like hay in the foreground one so that it can be different colors. So I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to get a fresh tester strip because I want to make sure that, so this is the color of our backdrop of that one, even though it doesn't look like it because we layered on top of it. And now we're going to modify it. So I'm going to put a little over here just so I have a little bit here. And then you know what we can do? We can add some of this green in. We don't need this to be super duper dark to go over this. We just need to make sure it's a little bit more concentrated. So I'm going to put a little more yellow in. Something like that I think will be perfect for these layers. Now, you want to make sure that this is dry-ish, so I'm going to really quickly just... Alright, so what we want to do next is we're going to be making our rows, and because we're not doing like a perfect perspective or anything here, but we do kind of want to fake it that these are getting smaller as they go away and they're getting bigger as they get closer to us. So you can actually just do this with your brush by just pushing harder as you pull towards you. You could also even do this if it's more comfortable in this direction. But what we want is we're kind of making these really elongated cones. If one single stroke does not work for you, you can do one stroke and then just make it a little bit bigger at the end like that. You choose how it's going to work best for you. But we also want them to kind of vanish, be closer together. near the top and further apart near the bottom of this kind of hill, I have my paper towel handy because kind of along where I want these to end, where I want them, I'm going to be placing another layer kind of over here. So where I want them to disappear behind, I'm just going to kind of blot up the very ends. So I'm going to start with kind of a middle one here. It's going to get a little bit bigger as I come down. If you need to, you could refill it. And then I think I want that to end about here so I can put my hill there. So I'm going to add, I'm just going to grab a little of that color. This one I'm going to start kind of close, and then it's going to get a little bit further away and a little bit wider at the bottom. Again, I'm just going to soak up that extra just there. This one's going to come down a little bit further. Kind of going with the line of the hill, the contours a little bit. Just making sure that it is bigger at the bottom than it is at the top, and then kind of lifting out a little bit of that color. I think that one is going to come kind of over here. We can probably ignore most of that because that is going to get covered. Let's go over onto this side. Let's bring it down just a little bit so that when I pick up that extra, I'm going to pick up the extra. And just add in these. I feel like you can already kind of see how that pushes that back with those stripes. They're not perfect, but they do kind of help us create that little bit of an illusion. All right, depending on how wet yours are, I think by the time I mix up my next color, these will not be so wet that I am unable to do my next layer. So I'm just going to forego the drying at this point. But I am going to start modifying this color, which again we started as this, and I want it to be more saturated than that, and I want it to be a little more golden. So we're just going to start right away grabbing more yellow, tiny bit of that orange color, yellow, a little orange, and I think that will be great. Actually, I'm going to put one brush full of water and one more yellow because I kind of want to use more of that orangey in the front. So something like that is going to be great for this. Okay, so I'm going to fill my brush here. Now I am going to be going over this area. It's going to kind of come up and down and then over here. And when I go over this, I have the potential for there to be a really harsh line right here, as you can see. So what I'm going to be doing is gently scrubbing when I get to there to kind of help distribute that, which will help to kind of soften that up. So we're going to start with our hill, going over that area. And look, I am able with a little, we don't want to scrub too much because we don't want to damage the paper, but with a little scrubbing action, just a little bit, we're able to kind of disappear that line. Okay, we're going to bring this up and down, making sure I refill this. And then we're going to put water in our brush, and we're going to pull this down. Because we're doing all these layers on top, and because we're making a real natural type thing, these do not need to be perfect. So if you wanted to, again, you could drop in, like add in a few little blooms or something, just to add in some texture, but you don't have to do that. But you could if you wanted to. And bring that all the way down to the bottom. I've textured it just a bit, and now it's time to let it dry or make it dry. And then again, we're going to be adding in those different lines. The one thing I don't want to do is come in with the same direction here because it'll get kind of confusing. So I want to make sure that at least over here, we start with more lines that are almost perpendicular to these, just so we can really visually differentiate these different layers. And I think for this layer, instead of it being green in the background, I think I want these to be a little bit more concentrated yellow. Or, yeah, I'm a little more golden. So I'm going to grab some brown. I'm thinking like dried grasses, that type of a thing, that where you can lay over this. I do need a little more water in general. And grab that. Let's get a little orange going in there. I think that'll be beautiful on top of there. Also, look, we as we're incorporating it over those different colors, look how it's a slightly different color. Okay, while I was making it dry, my camera overheated, so I had to step away for a bit. But we're back, and this is nice and dry. And now we're going to be taking this color, that's right, this is the color, to make our rose. And again, we're going kind of perpendicular rather than mimicking those, because we want to make sure that these do not get confused for the previous layer. So we're just doing kind of a similar thing. The ones that are on more of this line, we don't have to worry so much about making them bigger because they would be a little bit different. But I'm kind of bringing it up and then down, and then if I do make them come a little bit closer, or at a bit more of an angle, then I will be making them a little bit thicker as I come down. And I guess on this one, I've decided that this bottom layer will come all the way down over here. Let's try to pick up a little bit of that so it doesn't have to come down quite so far. I'm going to bring this up a little bit of that extra color, just so I can make that next row. And these don't have to be perfect. As we're looking at some of these, you know, this is meant to be a field, and while many farmers really try to make sure that their fields are plowed very evenly, it's not always done. I know this specifically because I have spent many hours with my dad examining other fields to see if their rows are plowed well. Also, if they're weeded well. My dad was a farmer, and I know sometimes he watches my videos, so if you're watching, hi Dad. We're going to bring these down here, and then these ones we're going to start to kind of swoop this way. Again, we want to make sure that depending on how you want your next layer to be, we're kind of planning the path that this next layer is going to be by the rows that we're making here. This is actually going to kind of swoop around this here. You know what? Actually, I'm going to bring this one all the way here. My next layer is going to come up and down like that. Just like that. Okay, again, I think that the bottom of these is more or less dry, so by the time I mix up my next color, I do need to put a little more water in there to make sure I have enough. You can do this with your spray bottle or just grab droplets. And I want this to be, the next layer is going to be our most yellowy orange color, or most saturated color. So let's just check. We need it more. Let's put a little brown in there. Yellow and orange. Okay, I think that that will be, ooh, maybe just a bit more. Maybe just a bit more yellow. Yes, I think that will be lovely as our final layer. So again, I'm going to be making kind of that swoop across, then filling my brush, refilling it mostly with this, but in a couple instances. And if I go over some of these lines, I'm going to scrub just a bit to kind of incorporate those. Let's refill and let's bring that down. A little bit more, a little more. Just put a little water in my brush just to get some variation. Bring that down. And then again, we need to let it dry or make it dry. In our final finishing touch, we're going to make this color a little bit darker. And again, we're going to make some different lines. And we want to make sure that these, as best we can, do not mimic the exact lines of the previous one. We do have some more saturation to contend with than between here and here, so we shouldn't get these mixed up, but just in case, we want to make sure that we have this. I'm going to really try to make these more just this direction, almost like this is, we're just driving like perpendicular to the rose on this one. So let's grab a little more of that brown, a little more brown. Because we're layering over another color, it will always be a little bit darker, so it doesn't need to go super duper darker, but a little bit is going to be good. Okay, we're going to make these, and we're going to start, I'm going to start this one here, and just bring it all the way there. This is our closest one, so if you wanted to, you could make these a little bit thicker intentionally, because these lines would be more than likely a little bit thicker than the previous ones, if we were really being true to perspective. This painting is not super true to perspective, so we are allowed to take some creative license with this. Just adding these in, just like that. Okay. Our painting is done, and now we get to get our little extra credit point by taking off the tape. And what I like to do to take my tape off so that it doesn't rip my paper is I lightly heat it up just a little bit, and then it really just comes off super easy. Once it's heated up, look, I'm barely touching it and it comes off. You just want to heat it up a little bit to get it going. Heat it up a bit, and then it's just sticking to my finger, and I can kind of get it off. Just barely touching it. I just absolutely love the tape reveal on these because it really cleans up and kind of pulls together a painting. I hope you had so much fun painting this, as well as seeing how you can take a simple idea and actually transition it into a more complicated idea with a little bit more time and a few more techniques with watercolor. Let me know in the comments if you've seen an area like this, if you've ever taken a drive and seen something that looks like this. Also, if you try this, please let me know how it goes in the comments and let me know your favorite part of the painting that you did. I hope that you're having an absolutely wonderful day, and if you don't have time to do this full one right now and you want a shorter version of it, you can head over to my shorts and do the 10-minute version of this.